Welcome to a journey through some of the most chilling encounters ever experienced. Imagine venturing into an abandoned sanatorium where ghostly whispers follow your every step, exploring a secluded forest where a creature known only as the Mimic stalks your every move, or hearing a child's laughter in the night as you camp in the mysterious whispering woods. These are tales of terror that linger long after the last page is read, leaving us questioning what truly lies hidden in the shadows. First, we'll brave the haunted halls of Pine Hollow Sanatorium, where an innocent night of thrill-seeking turns into a horrifying nightmare for three friends. Then, we'll follow two campers into the Montana wilderness, where an ancient being might just steal your identity. And finally, the eerie story of The Laughing Child, where a simple camping trip unleashes a haunting that follows one person back home. Turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare for three spine-chilling tales that prove some fears are very, very real. Let's begin. The haunting at Pine Hollow Sanatorium. It was supposed to be just another late-night adventure. My friends Mike, Eva, and I had explored every eerie corner of our town already. Vacant factories, abandoned schools, you name it. But we craved more. A real scare. We had a hunger for the kind of fear that lingered long after you turned out the lights and hid under the covers. So, when Eva brought up the old Pine Hollow Sanatorium, it sounded like the perfect challenge. This place was different. It was deep in the woods and infamous for its dark history, where whispers of tortured souls and spine-chilling secrets drifted like shadows in the night. "I bet you two won't make it an hour in there," Eva teased, her grin daring us to back out. Naturally, we took the bait, pretending we weren't already spooked. Pine Hollow had a notorious reputation, with rumors of ghostly figures and unexplained disappearances dating back decades. Some locals said that it had once housed patients who suffered from strange afflictions, and that their spirits still roamed the halls, searching for peace they'd never find. But we brushed off the stories as urban legends, nothing more than campfire tales meant to scare kids. Or so we thought. As we drove up the muddy path, rain began drizzling, then pouring, making the journey even eerier. The dark forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming tall and ominous, their branches clawing at the sky like bony fingers. The wind howled through the trees, and it almost sounded like a warning, a low, mournful whisper urging us to turn back. Mike, at the wheel, chuckled nervously. "Maybe the place doesn't want us here," he muttered, his voice barely masking his apprehension. My stomach churned with unease as I glanced out the window, the headlights casting fleeting shadows that danced with the rain. When we finally reached the sanatorium, the sight of it took my breath away. Half hidden in the overgrown brush, the decayed building loomed over us, its shattered windows staring back like hollow, accusing eyes. Vines snaked up the crumbling walls, clawing their way into the darkness within. The air around it felt heavy, almost oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Grabbing our flashlights, we stepped out into the downpour and approached the structure. Each step felt like an invitation to something we couldn't fully understand, a darkness waiting to envelop us. Just as we reached the doorway, a voice, a faint but unmistakable whisper, drifted from the shadows. "Come closer." We froze, glancing at each other with wide eyes. Eva laughed it off, trying to shake off the tension. Just the wind, right? But we all knew better. Inside, the air was thick and musty, every breath tinged with the scent of decay. Silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the distant drip of water from the leaking roof and the rustling of leaves outside. I shined my flashlight around the entrance, and the beam barely pierced the thick darkness. Graffiti covered the walls, but among the usual tags and symbols were strange, twisted shapes I couldn't recognize. They seemed to pulse and shift if I looked at them too long, as if alive. As we moved further into the sanatorium, the sense of unease grew, settling over us like a heavy blanket. The hallways stretched endlessly, each one darker and more foreboding than the last. The shadows seemed to twist and dance, and the silence was so complete that even the faintest whisper felt like a shout. Suddenly, a low, mocking laugh echoed down the hallway. It was a sound that didn't belong, something dark and inhuman. "Did you hear that?" Mike whispered, his voice tight with fear. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. We tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow, forced. The rain drummed against the roof, adding to the tension as Eva suggested we split up to cover more ground. Despite every horror movie cliché warning us not to, we agreed, each of us heading down different corridors. My flashlight bobbed as I walked, the beam illuminating only a few feet ahead, leaving the rest of the hallway shrouded in darkness. I hadn't gone far when I heard it again, the laugh, closer this time. I shined my light down the hallway and saw a shadow move. "Ava?" I called out, but there was no reply. Panic started to creep in as I moved forward, trying to steady my breathing. At the end of the hall, a figure stood, facing away from me. It wore clothes identical to mine, down to the frayed hem of my jeans and the patch on my jacket. I froze, my hand trembling as I held the flashlight steady. The figure turned slowly, its face emerging from the shadows. It was me, an eerie, hollowed version of myself, with eyes that held nothing but darkness and a smile that twisted into something sinister. My breath caught in my throat and I stumbled back, barely able to hold the flashlight steady. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Eva scream, her voice raw with terror. "Hold on!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. But all I could hear was that laugh, low and mocking, filling the silence like a dark melody. The walls seemed to close in around me as I ran toward the noise, my heart racing. When I found her, she was standing in front of a wall, staring at it with vacant eyes. Her face was twisted into a smile that was anything but natural, her eyes empty and unseeing. "Join us," she whispered, her voice distant, almost mechanical. Fear surged through me, and I bolted, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as I tried to find a way out. Every corner I turned seemed to lead me deeper into the sanatorium, the hallways stretching out like a labyrinth designed to trap me. The laughter followed me, relentless and mocking, growing louder with every step. After what felt like an eternity, I finally burst through the front door, the cold rain hitting my face like a shock of reality. I gasped for breath, relief washing over me, only to see Mike and Eva standing by the car, their faces pale and twisted into identical grins. They looked at me with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, only the same hollow darkness I had seen in my own reflection. I backed away, my mind racing, every instinct screaming for me to get as far away from them as possible. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my feet slipping in the mud as I made my way down the path. The rain poured down, mixing with my tears as I fled, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached the car, I threw myself inside, slamming the door and locking it. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. As I sped down the muddy road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those twisted smiles staring back at me from the back seat. But there was nothing, only the rain and the darkness stretching out behind me. As the sanatorium disappeared into the distance, I felt a chill settle over me, a sense of dread that refused to fade. Even now, I can still hear that laughter echoing in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that waits, just beyond the edge of the light. The experience at Pine Hollow changed me. I tried to explain what happened to people, but no one believed me. They called it a trick of the mind, a case of overactive imagination fueled by horror stories and urban legends. But I knew the truth. I had seen something beyond comprehension, lurking in the shadows of that decaying sanatorium. Weeks turned into months, but the memories never faded. I would see Mike and Eva around town, their smiles just a bit too wide, their eyes never quite meeting mine. Sometimes when I passed them on the street, I'd hear that same mocking laugh, low and sinister, echoing in the back of my mind. I tried to move on, to put it all behind me, but some things can't be forgotten. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear it. The laughter echoing in the darkness, reminding me of what lies waiting in the shadows. And no matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to escape, I know that some part of me will always be trapped in the halls of Pine Hollow, lost in the darkness, haunted by the ghosts of that night, echoes of the past. The city had been wearing on Max and me, its ceaseless rhythm seeping into our bones. We craved a break, a quiet reprieve in nature to reset. Max had told me about a place in Montana that fit our need for isolation. This wasn't a well-known campsite with amenities or crowds. It was a hidden gem he'd stumbled upon during a past adventure. There were no trails to guide us, no signs welcoming travelers, just miles of untouched wilderness waiting to be explored. The idea of disconnecting completely, surrounded by Montana's untouched expanse, seemed almost too good to pass up. We packed light, taking only the essentials for camping: food, water, tents, and basic survival gear. The drive was long but strangely soothing, the hum of the engine blending with the rustling trees and occasional calls of wildlife. We didn't speak much, savoring the calm that each mile deeper into Montana's wild lands brought us. Yet, as we finally reached the forest entrance, an odd sensation began to creep over us. A heavy quiet that settled over the trees, pressing down on everything around. It wasn't the peaceful silence we had anticipated. This was dense, almost palpable, as if the forest itself was watching us. As we drove deeper, the once inviting wilderness took on an eerie quality. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and patches of light fought to break through the dense canopy above. Eventually, we reached the spot Max had promised, a serene lake, still and glass-like, nestled among towering pines. We set up camp by its shores, hoping that the unsettling stillness was just a trick of our urbanized minds. But even after our tents were up and the fire crackling, that feeling didn't fade. Instead, it lingered, cloaking our little campsite in a silence so profound that even our whispered conversations felt loud. The first night by the campfire, we laughed off the strange quiet, attributing it to our city nerves. To lighten the mood, Max decided to tell a ghost story, one he swore was true. He spoke of a creature he called the Mimic, a figure known in local legends for its uncanny ability to replicate the appearance of anyone it encountered. They say the Mimic lives in the deepest parts of these woods, watching and waiting, he said, his voice low and ominous. When it sees you, it remembers you, and then it's just a matter of time before it becomes you. We chuckled nervously, brushing off the story as an attempt to scare us. But as the fire's warmth faded and we retreated to our tents, a lingering unease took root. Max's words haunted me as I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself it was just a story. But sleep eluded me. Sometime in the night, a rustling sound near my tent jolted me awake. I held my breath, straining to listen, my pulse quickening. Gathering the courage to peek outside, I unzipped the tent just a crack and glanced out. In the dim light, I thought I saw Max standing by the edge of the trees, staring back at me. But as quickly as I saw him, he was gone. The next morning, Max and I shared uneasy glances but didn't discuss the night. Instead, we busied ourselves with breakfast and planned a hike. As we packed up our gear, I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding our campsite. The markings were fresh, their edges sharp and clean, and they seemed to form some kind of warning or boundary, though we couldn't understand their meaning. Max shrugged it off as campers' pranks or an attempt to keep strangers out, but the symbols unnerved me. Our hike led us deeper into the forest, where the silence grew even more suffocating. Even the birds seemed reluctant to break the quiet. It was as if we had wandered into a realm where sound didn't belong. We stumbled upon a deer carcass on the trail, its body arranged in a way that was disturbing in its precision. The sight left us shaken, and we quickened our pace, feeling as if invisible eyes were tracking our every move. The once inviting wilderness now felt like a trap. That night, as darkness settled around us, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the crackling fire, but gradually they grew louder, echoing through the trees, calling out our names. I clutched my flashlight, its beam flickering as I scanned the shadows. I saw a figure in the distance, tall and unnaturally still, its face twisted into a grotesque imitation of a smile. It vanished the moment I tried to focus on it, but the image remained seared in my mind. The whispers continued, circling our campsite, growing louder until it felt as if the forest itself was alive, mocking us. Our flashlights died one by one, leaving us huddled together in the oppressive darkness, too terrified to move. We waited for dawn in a state of restless, fearful silence, praying that the first light would chase away whatever haunted these woods. When morning finally came, we packed in record time, our nerves frayed and our bodies exhausted. As we drove away, the feeling of being watched never lifted. Even as the trees thinned and the road stretched ahead, I couldn't shake the sense that something had followed us out of those woods, lingering just out of sight, waiting to return. And even now, back in the safety of the city, sometimes I hear whispers, soft, insistent, calling my name in the quiet of the night. I tell myself it's just the echoes of a long weekend in Montana, a memory warped by fear. But deep down, I know the mimic is out there, watching, waiting, biding its time until it finds me again. The laughing child. I ventured into the whispering woods on a chilly autumn afternoon, yearning for solitude. Life had become a cacophony of stress and regret, and I sought the quiet company of nature, convinced that the dense canopy and silent paths would offer me peace. As I entered the forest, a strange feeling settled over me, a mix of wonder and unease. Whispering woods had always been mysterious. Legends told of people vanishing without a trace or coming back changed, but I dismissed them as mere folklore. The further I went, the thicker the canopy grew, casting the woods in perpetual twilight. Leaves crunched underfoot, each step echoing slightly, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Evening was approaching, and the quiet, which I had once craved, felt unnatural. I set up camp, fighting the creeping anxiety that tugged at the edges of my mind. That night, a chill ran down my spine as I heard a child's laughter somewhere in the distance. I froze, heart pounding, straining to listen. Surely it was my imagination. Yet the laughter continued, soft, airy, innocent, and out of place in the stillness. It didn't feel threatening at first, but something about the sound gnawed at my nerves. Shaking my head, I decided to ignore it, focusing on the rustling of the leaves and the cool air to ground myself. Hours passed, but sleep remained elusive. The laughter seemed to circle my campsite, always distant, yet persistently taunting. Despite my best efforts, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I tried convincing myself it was some animal or the wind twisting through the trees, but logic was flimsy comfort. Just before dawn, my nerves frayed and exhaustion settling in, I heard a faint metallic jingle outside my tent. Swallowing my fear, I unzipped the tent cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the shadows. There, nestled in the leaves, lay a small, rusted bell. It looked ancient, the metal worn and darkened by time, yet it had an inexplicable pull, as though it held memories of long-forgotten things. Cold dread blossomed in my chest, but I dismissed it as lingering fear from the night. The sun was barely up, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. I packed quickly, eager to escape whatever haunted the whispering woods. As I moved, I stumbled upon a campsite nearby, abandoned, shredded, and scattered, as if its occupants had fled in terror. The remnants felt wrong, and I didn't linger, unwilling to imagine what might have happened there. With my gear loaded, I hurried back to the trail, relieved to feel the engine purring as I left the forest behind. But just as I reached the edge of the woods, a final chill gripped me. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw something that froze me to the core. Standing among the trees was a small figure, pale and eyeless, clutching the bell. Its face was blank, expressionless, yet somehow I felt its gaze, piercing and hungry. The image stayed with me long after I returned home. The pale, eyeless figure haunted my dreams, and I awoke most nights drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, the result of an exhausted mind, but the feeling of dread persisted. Weeks passed and life settled back into its routine, though I could not shake the lingering sense of unease. Then, one rainy afternoon, a package arrived at my door. I hadn't ordered anything, but curiosity won over caution. I unwrapped it to find the bell. No longer rusted and worn, it gleamed, polished, almost radiant. It was the same bell from Whispering Woods. I knew it. The sight of it sent ice through my veins, and I knew then that whatever lurked in the woods had followed me home. That night, the laughter returned. It echoed through my house, soft and lilting, the sound of a child at play. I locked every door, every window, but the laughter only grew louder, relentless and mocking. The bell would appear in random places, no matter where I tried to hide it. My desk, my dresser, even under my pillow. Each time I found it, polished and gleaming, as if taunting me. Desperation drove me to research the Whispering Woods, hoping for some explanation or escape. I uncovered stories of lost children, of spirits bound to objects, forced to wander the earth until someone freed them. The bell, I realized, was no mere trinket. It was a tether, a curse that had latched onto me, binding me to whatever spirit inhabited the woods. Determined to rid myself of the bell, I tried burning it, burying it, and even throwing it into a river. But it always returned, as if it had a life of its own. Each time it reappeared, the child's laughter grew louder, more insistent, and I began to see the eyeless figure in the shadows, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. With no other options, I decided to return to the Whispering Woods, hoping that leaving the bell there would break the curse. As I stepped into the forest, the familiar sense of dread returned, suffocating and thick. The trees seemed closer, the shadows darker, as though the woods remembered me. Nightfall approached, and the laughter began again, growing louder with each step. I clutched the bell, feeling its cold weight, and pressed deeper into the forest, drawn toward the place where I'd first found it. As I neared the clearing, a pale figure appeared, a child small and hollow, with a face devoid of eyes, clutching its own version of the bell. It reached out a hand, and for a moment, I saw the child as it must have once been, innocent, lost, and bound to the woods by some malevolent force. I held out the bell, hoping this would end the haunting, but the child's laughter twisted, darkening into something cruel. The figure lunged forward, and I stumbled back, dropping the bell. I watched in horror as it rolled to the child's feet, glinting in the dim light, its polished surface reflecting the twisted form. I don't remember how I escaped, only that I ran, the laughter echoing behind me. When I reached my car, I didn't look back. I drove for hours until the woods were nothing but a memory in my rearview mirror. For days, I felt relieved, convinced I was free. But a sense of dread gnawed at me, a whisper of fear that the curse might not be over. One morning, a faint laughter echoed in my house, and I found the bell resting on my nightstand, polished and gleaming, waiting for me. Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.